Hello students, welcome to this another discussion video on the topic borrowing cost. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify items included in borrowing cost, explain the concept of a qualifying asset and relation to capitalization of borrowing cost, account for borrowing cost properly, and to determine the amount of borrowing cost to be capitalized from either specific or general borrowings. Let us start with the definition of borrowing cost. So according to PES 23, borrowing costs are interest and other costs that an entity incurs in connection from borrowing of funds. So in short, this borrowing cost is related to our liabilities. So it includes the following. So first, of course, the interest expense. So the interest expense incurred by the entity, which is calculated using effective interest method, is considered a borrowing cost. Another is the finance charge. So finance charge with respect to finance list. So maybe we're not yet very familiar with finance list, but this finance list class is a type of lease, no, or rent, wherein the substance of the transaction really is that the lessee is actually purchasing in installment na the asset of the lessor. So parang in form, para siyang lease lang or renta lang, but then in substance, parang binibili na ng lessee ang property ng lessor. So if in case, no, there are finance charges in relation to a finance lease, and usually meron talaga yan because usually long-term or longer ang term ng finance lease. So it will result really to finance charges. So that is still considered, no, a borrowing cost. Another is exchange difference. So ito exchange difference na to, this arises, no, from foreign currency borrowings. So as long as this exchange difference is related to an adjustment to your interest cost. So ibig sabihin, no, since we know that the foreign exchange fluctuates from time to time. So if ever, no, there are differences, no, merong fluctuations, and it has that particular fluctuation is really, um, related to the interest, then that exchange difference can still be considered as borrowing cost. Let us proceed to accounting for borrowing cost. So, paano ba natin i-account ang borrowing cost? Kasi diba usually, pag borrowing cost or mga interest, no, mga finance cost or finance charges, usually what we do is we just expense them outright. Now, ano bang special, no? Bakit ba diniscuss separately yung borrowing cost? By the way, class, no, itong borrowing cost na topic na to is still related doon sa ating topic about acquisition of property, plant, and equipment. No? So yung property, plant, and equipment na discussion natin, related sa construction. So specifically, this is a topic which is related to construction. No? Since we were trying to establish the initial cost of your property, plant, and equipment acquired through construction. So this is again related to that particular topic na construction because you want to establish kung magkano ba ang ating total cost na dapat i-measure or dapat i-recognize on initial measurement. Okay? So balik tayo dito. How do we account for borrowing cost na? So again, PAS 23 mandates the following rules on borrowing cost. So if the borrowing is directly attributable to the acquisition, construction, or production of the qualifying asset, then the borrowing cost is required to be capitalized as cost of the asset. Second, all other borrowing costs shall be expensed as incurred. So Yung second bullet, this is actually what we're doing, no? Kasi uh, when we incur interest in relation to borrowing, we usually expense that outright. So when you incur it, expense na natin agad. But then, there is one provision in PAS 23 that states na meron palang borrowing cost na ikakapitalize. No? There are borrowing cost pala which needs to be capitalized. And kailan tayo magkakapitalize ng borrowing cost? So, ang sinasabi ng standard is that magkakapitalize tayo ng borrowing cost if that borrowings o yung utang, no, where this particular borrowing cost is related to is attributable to the acquisition, construction, or production of a qualifying asset. So now, um, since sabi natin na capitalizable ang borrowing cost if it is related to the construction or acquisition or production of a qualifying asset. So it's better na to know ano ba yung qualifying asset. Kasi sabi natin pag qualifying asset, kung related pala sa qualifying asset ang borrowings, then kailangan nating i-capitalize ang borrowing cost. So when we capitalize it, we mean na idadagdag natin sa cost, no, ng asset na ating in-acquire. So what is this qualifying asset? So qualifying asset is an asset that takes a substantial period of time to get ready for the intended use or sale. So medyo medyo matagal siyang matapos. So asset na would require certain period of time na before siya maging ready for its intended use or sale. So examples natin ito, usually mga building, no? First, you have manufacturing plant. So if you're going to construct, if you're going to build a manufacturing plant, then it will really take time. So it may be 1 year or it may be maybe more than a year, no, before you can really complete you can really completely build a manufacturing plant or a power generation facility. So yan, medyo matagal-tagal din na tatarabuhuin yan. Or an intangible asset because it will require, di ba, research pa yan, no? Magre-research pa. So, if you're trying to develop, for example, a product which you intend, no, to um, apply for a patent, for example, then yung patent na yun, matagal pa siyang ma-develop. So, that could qualify or that could be classified or could be considered as qualifying asset. Or an investment property. Say for example, nagpa-ano ka ng building, no? Nagpa-construct ka with the intention of um, renting it out in the future pag matapos siya. So again, basically, pag construct ng building, medyo matagal siya matapos. So therefore, these types of assets are considered qualifying asset. So kung babalikan natin, again, pag ganito ang klase na asset na inacquire ng entity, so tapos nangutang ka. So nangutang ka para i-finance ng ganitong klase ng asset, no? Para maka-acquire ka ng ganitong klase na asset. So again, pag meron kang interest expense, no, or borrowing cost na na-incur in relation, no, to your borrowings na ipi-finance natin sa pag-acquire ng qualifying asset, then that borrowing cost should be capitalized per PAS 23. So ibig sabihin, class, no, kailangan nating i-add, no, idagdag sa cost ng ating asset, no, ng qualifying asset ang borrowing cost because it is capitalizable per PAS 23. Now, there are items which are excluded, no, from capitalization. So sabi dito, PS 23 does not require capitalization of borrowing costs related to the following. So first, if the assets are measured at fair value, so hindi capitalizable ang borrowing cost pag nag-acquire ka ng assets which are measured at fair value. So example niya dito ay biological assets. Like biological assets refers actually to mga baka, for example, that you intend, no, na gamitin for reproduction, or so for the production of milk, for example, no, or yung pagpapasanay na ng baka, yan. So since biological assets are measured at fair value, we are not going to capitalize any borrowing costs that we incur in relation to the this particular asset. Another is inventory, which are manufactured or produced in large quantity on a repetitive basis. So pag repetitive na, so this is really the usual. Na you are going to manufacture inventory on a large na batch. So for that particular, say for example, kasi large batch siya, most probably mag-uutang ka, no, to finance it. So just take note that interest costs or borrowing costs that you're going to incur in relation to the production of this inventory, if you do it on a repetitive basis, no, yun na talaga yung iyong um, nakasanayan na you are going to manufacture your inventory in bulk, then the borrowing costs related to it will not be capitalizable, no, kahit nangutang ka. So next is assets that are ready for their intended use or sale when you acquire it. So since ready naman siya for intended use agad-agad, so it will not really fall under the category of qualifying assets. Say for example, no, bumili ka ng lupa na may building na. So since ready na siya for intended use, no, yung building mo ay gagamitin mo na siya agad. So assets that are ready for intended use or sale when acquired. So again, since this particular asset is already ready, no, when you acquire them, so it will not be classified as qualifying assets. If, for example, you purchase a land with a building, so if that building will be used immediately, and so nang wala ka nang gagawin, um, hindi mo na siya tatanggalin, no? Hindi mo na siya i-remove. So yun na talaga yung building na gagamitin mo as you intend to. Then that particular, as for example, nangutang ka, no, in order to purchase this asset. So yung interest, no, sa utang mo na pambili ng asset na ito na ready na for intended use will not qualify, or yes, will not qualify as qualifying asset. So therefore, ang borrowing cost na mai-incur mo dito ay hindi siya capitalizable. So pag hindi capitalizable, most probably, we're going to expense it outright. So proceed tayo dito, no, sa specific na how do we account for borrowing. So let's try to compute, determine, no, the borrowing cost which is capitalizable. So first we have here for assets financed by specific borrowing. So PS23 provides that if the funds are borrowed specifically for the purpose of acquiring a qualifying asset, the amount of capitalizable is the actual borrowing cost incurred during the period less any investment income from the temporary investment of those borrowings. So again, kapag pala nangutang tayo and we specifically intend, no, to use that borrowings or the proceeds of that loan to acquire a qualifying asset. So take note that ang capitalizable na borrowing cost is just equivalent to the actual borrowing cost that you incurred minus any investment income from temporary investment. So, kasi 'di ba class, hindi naman lahat, say for example, nangutang ka 10 million to finance the construction of a building. So, hindi naman yan agad at lahat ng 10 million ay gagamitin mo agad lahat, no, sa construction. So what I'm trying to say is that meron pang portion dyan sa 10 million na inutang mo na pwede mong i-invest somewhere else. Kasi hindi naman yan one time na ika-cash out mo. So, if ever, no, na invest mo yung portion of your loan, then naka-income siya or meron siyang interest income na earn, then that particular interest income or investment income will be deducted from your actual borrowing cost in order to determine the capitalizable borrowing cost. So we have here this formula. So your capitalizable borrowing cost is just equal to your actual borrowing cost incurred minus the investment income. So yun yung ating capitalization or capitalizable na borrowing cost kapag specific ang borrowing, no, or kapag ang asset ay finance by specific borrowing. So we have here an illustration. So at the beginning of the current year, an entity obtained a loan of 5 million at an interest rate of 10%. So specifically to finance the construction of a new building. Availments from the loan were made quarterly in equal amounts. Total borrowing costs incurred amounted to 500,000 for the current year. Prior to their disbursement, the proceeds of the borrowing were temporarily invested and earned interest income of 50,000. So the building was completed at the current year. So if you're asked to compute for the capitalizable borrowing cost, then this is how you compute it. No? Your actual borrowing cost, which is 500,000, ito given na siya, will be reduced, no, by the interest income from your temporary investment. So yan 50,000. So therefore, your capitalizable borrowing cost is 450,000. So ibig sabihin class, no, yung 450,000 mo, yun yung amount na ating i-add, no, doon sa cost of our constructed na building, no, in this case. Next, what if, no, the asset is financed by a general borrowing? So ano naman ito, no? As 23 provides that if the funds are borrowed generally and used for acquiring and qualifying asset, so the amount of capitalizable borrowing cost is equal to the average carrying amount of the asset during the period multiplied by a capitalization rate or average interest rate. So balikan lang muna natin, no? So pag sinabi nating finance by general borrowing, ibig sabihin class, nangutang ka and that particular utang is not really specifically intended to finance, no, the qualifying asset. However, in the course, since nagko-construct ka, so portion of that borrowings was used, no, sa pag-acquire or sa pag-construct ng qualifying asset. So, ang problema natin ngayon is magkano ba ang amount na ikakapitalize natin as part of the cost of the asset. So, we have here a formula. So, binigyan tayo ng formula, no, that is the average carrying amount of the asset, i-multiply lang natin siya by the capitalization rate. So, parang ang simple lang naman, no? Kung ibibigay na ang average carrying amount ng asset tsaka ng capitalization rate. Kaso, in most of the problems, hindi siya ibinibigay ahead or hindi siya binibigay agad-agad. So, you still have to compute for it. So another concept here that you have to remember is that capitalizable borrowing cost shall not exceed the actual interest incurred. So using this formula here, yung average carrying amount times capitalization rate. So dapat yung amount, no, na madederive mo dyan should not be more than the actual interest na incur. Of course, no, kasi within that bounds only ang pwede natin i-capitalize na borrowing cost. So, paano ba mag-compute ng capitalization rate? So, this is how you compute the capitalization rate. That is your total annual borrowing cost. So, yung lahat ng mga interest na na-incur mo in relation to general borrowings, i-divide lang natin yung total general borrowings outstanding during the period. So, yung rate na makukuha mo dyan, yun na yung iyong pang-multiply doon sa ating average carrying amount of the asset. So another thing is that 'di ba kanina pag specific yung borrowing, ang kapag merong investment income ay dideduct natin doon sa actual na borrowing cost. But dito, class, sa general borrowing, take note that since wala namang silent yung standard, no, kung ano ang gagawin sa ating investment income na related to general borrowing. So, the treatment is that hindi natin i-deduct from capitalizable borrowing cost. So in short, kapag general borrowing, any investment income derived no, from temporary investments will not be deducted. So parang i-ignore lang natin siya. Hindi natin siya i-deduct from the capitalizable borrowing cost. Okay? So proceed tayo dito sa illustration. So ito yung illustration na general ang borrowing. So an entity had the following borrowings on January 1 of the current year. The borrowings were made for general purposes and the proceeds were partly used to finance the construction of a new building. So we have here a 10% bank loan. The principal amount is 3 million. So the interest is 300,000. 12% short-term note na 1.5 million. Sa interest niya ay 180,000. 8% long-term note. So yung principal niya ay 3.5 million and the interest is 280,000. So ang total na outstanding na general borrowings ay 8 million. Whereas the interest na the total borrowing cost na incurred for the period is 760,000. So the construction of the building was started on January 1 and was completed on December 31 of the current year. So expenditures on the building were as follows. So you have here na ito yung mga spendings na kanilang na-incur. So ito yung mga expenditures na kanilang na-incur all throughout the year. So from January 1 na merong 400,000, March 31, 1 million, June 30, 1.2, September 30, 1 million, December 31 na 400,000. So yung total cost is 4 million pesos. So how do we compute for the capitalizable borrowing cost? So unang-una class, you have muna to determine the average carrying amount of the asset. So that's your step 1. So paano ba i-compute ang average carrying amount of the asset? So you have here the date, the expenditures, and then months outstanding and then the amount. So yung months outstanding, what we have to do here is you simply count, ilang months ba outstanding or ang balance na to, yung expenditure na to, na hindi, yes, from the moment that you incur it until the cut-off period, which is December 31. So for example, kung January 1 na incur itong 400,000, ibig sabihin, 12 months siya outstanding, divide, of course, 12 months in a year. So you'll have 400,000. For March 31, so kung iyong ika-count yan, so di ba, you'll start with April until December, so that is good for 9 months. So that your fraction will be 9 over 10 times, of course, 1 million, the amount that you spend as of on March 31. So that's 750,000. So the same thing with June 30. So yung 1.2 million, i-multiply natin siya by 6 over 12. 6 over 12 kasi mag-start ka ng counting mo sa July 1 until December 31. So it will give you 600,000. And then for September 30, you have na lang 3 months. So that's 1 million times 3 over 12 to 250,000. For December 31, kasi December 31 na nga na-incur, so last day na yon ng pag-complete ng asset. So wala nang months outstanding, kasi doon na siya, bandang sa dulo na siya na-incur. So the average carrying amount of the asset is 2 million. So ito na yung first natin na element sa ating formula na average carrying amount of the asset times capitalization rate. So meron na tayong isang element of the formula. Second, yung pangalawa naman is yun. We have to determine now the capitalization rate. So to determine the capitalization rate, this is very simple class, you just get the quotient of the total borrowing cost here, yan, 760,000. you divide it by the total general borrowings outstanding, which is 8 million. So with that, nakuha natin yung capitalization rate na 9.5%. So meron na tayong average carrying amount na 2 million times, of course, no, your capitalization rate na 9.5 million. So the last step would be now to determine the borrowing or the capitalizable borrowing cost. So your capitalizable borrowing cost is just equals to the average carrying amount of the asset, which is 2 million times 9.5%, which is, of course, the capitalization rate. So that's a total of 190,000. So just take note that 190,000 is really our capitalizable cost, and it's acceptable because it's less than the actual borrowing cost of 760,000. Okay? So yung ating 190,000, yun yung amount na i-add natin sa ating cost na na-incur na 4 million para makuha natin ang ating total cost of the building, which is, in this case, 4,190,000. Now, kung tatanungin, di ba kasi what happened? Your total interest incurred for the period is 760,000. Pero yung kinapitalize mo ay only 190,000. So what happens to, magkano yan? You have 760,000 minus 190,000. So what will happen to 570,000? No, yung difference ng actual cost na na-incur, actual borrowing cost compared to your capitalizable borrowing cost. So take note, class, that yung 570,000 ay i-charge natin siya as interest expense. No? So usual lang na interest expense. Okay? Sige, proceed tayo to another illustration. So you have here, what if your asset is financed both by specific and general borrowing? And usually ito yung talagang nangyayari na ang ating asset ay financed by specific tsaka general borrowing. So we have here our illustration for a qualifying asset financed by both specific and general borrowing. So at the beginning again of the current year, an entity borrowed 1.5 million at an interest of 10% specifically for the construction of a new building. So the actual borrowing cost of this loan is 150,000. So the entity had also an outstanding during the year, a 5-year 8% general borrowing of 7 million. So the construction of the building started on January 1 and completed on December 31 of the current year. So these are the expenditures incurred during the construction. So you have January 1, April 1, May 1, September 1, December 31. So for a total cost of 5 million. So the first thing that you have to do is still the same. No? We still compute first for the average cost of the asset, or the average carrying amount of the asset. So we have here for January 1, 500,000. So the outstanding months in year is 12 months. On April 1, so that is 9 months over 12. So on May 1, that's 8 over 12. And then on September 1, that's 4 over 12. And of course, on December 31, wala na siyang outstanding months. So since na-incurred siya on the last day of the year. So these are now the amounts applicable for each expenditure. And if you're going to add all of this, it will tally to 2,750,000. So in short, the average carrying amount of the asset is 2,750,000. So after that, the next thing that you have to do is compute for the amount of expenditures which are from the general borrowings, are considered from the general borrowing. So if the average expenditures of this construction is 2,750,000, tapos 1.5 million is coming from the specific borrowings. So in short, what is just applicable from your general borrowings is 1,250,000. So ibig sabihin, class, only 1,250,000 is was used from the general borrowings. So the next thing that you have to do is you cannot determine the amount of capitalizable borrowing cost. So first is for your specific borrowing. So you have 10%. Again, as mentioned, that's 10% times your principal of 1.5, 150,000. Although it was also given already in the problem, no? So 150,000. For the general borrowings naman, so the outstanding, the rate actually is 8%. So yan. Pero since hindi naman lahat na expenditures ay galing sa general borrowing, so merong specific borrowing. So what we are going to multiply here is only the amount of the expenditures na deemed to be coming from the general borrowings. In this case, that's 1,250,000. So yung 8% natin, multiply natin by 1,250,000, it will give us 100,000. So if you're going to add up the specific borrowings or the borrowing cost from the specific borrowing and the borrowing cost from the general borrowing, so you'll have 250,000. So yung ating capitalizable borrowing cost ay 250,000. So if you'll be asked, magkano yung total cost of your building, then that will be 5,250,000. So 5 million because that's the total cost or the total expenditures na incurred for the construction of the building. Okay? So what if hindi umabot ng 2 years, no? So more than 1 year ang what if the construction period is more than 1 year? Kasi the previous discussion is 1 taon lang talaga. So what if ang construction period ay naglast siya for more than 1 year? So we have here an illustration. So an entity had the following outstanding loans during 2019 and 2020. So for the specific loan, you have 2 million. The interest rate is 15%. For the general loan, you have 15 million. The interest rate is 12%. So the entity began construction of a new building on January 1, 2019. And the building were completed on was completed on December 31, 2020. So the following expenditures were made during 2019 and 2020. So ito yung mga expenses na incur nila. So for a total of 10 million until July 1, 2020. So these are the expenses made. So paano natin i-compute or i-solve? So ganun din class, no? So una natin gawin ay compute natin yung average carrying amount of the asset for the first year. So for the first year, ito yung tatlong expenditures na na-incur. So you have on January 1, 2 million, on July 1, 2019, 4 million, and on December 1, 2019, nawala ang 9, you have 3 million. So ito yung mga months outstanding. So yung January, of course, 12 over 12 tayo. Then on July, from July 1 until December 31, so that's 6 months. So 6 over 12. And then for November 1, so November, December, that's 2 months left na lang. So you'll have 2 over 12. So times 3 million itong 500,000. So as of 2019, as of December 31, 2019, the average carrying amount of the asset is 4.5 million. So after that, the next thing that you have to do is determine natin agad kung magkano ba yung amount ng expenditures na applicable or galing sa general borrowings for 2019. So as computed, the average carrying amount of the asset or the average expenditures amounts to 4.5 million. So i-deduct lang natin yung borrowings from specific na loan. So we have 2 million. So what is applicable na lang to your general borrowings will be 2.5 million. So for us to compute the amount of capitalizable borrowing cost, so this is it. So for your specific borrowing, you have 15% times 2 million. So that will give you 300,000. For your general loan naman, for the general borrowing cost, so you have 2.5 million ang ating gagamitin multiplied by the interest rate, which is 12%. So that's 300,000. So for a total of 600,000. So as of December 31, 2019, ito yung cost ng building. So yung actual expenditures natin ay 9 million. So saan galing ang 9 million? That is yung 2 million plus 4 million, that is 6 million plus 3 million, so that's 9 million. So as of December 31, 2019, ito na yung mga na-spend ng entity, no, or ang nagastos ng entity for the construction of the building. Tapos, i-add natin yung capitalizable na borrowing cost, which is 600,000. So, ibig sabihin, as of December 31, 2019, the cost of the building is 9.6 million. So, if you'll be asked, no, as of December 31, 2019, magkano ba ang cost ng building? So, yan, 9.6 million. So, that includes already the borrowing or the capitalizable borrowing cost. Now, to continue the illustration, kasi 'di ba yun 2019, tapos natapos ang ating building 2020 pa December 31. So, the same thing lang class, no? So, pagdating ng 2020, so yung ating December 31 balance na 9.6 million becomes the beginning balance, of course, of January 1, 2020. So, you will have ito, no? 12 over 12 kasi 12 months outstanding yan. So you have 9.6 million. So another expenditure was on July 1, 2020, so which is 1 million. So that is 6 over 12. Kasi nga, from July 1 until December, that is 6 months. So they'll have 500,000. So for a total of 10,100,000. So that's your average carrying amount. So the next thing is, of course, you determine naman how much of this expenditure is applicable for general borrowings. So if our average expenditures as computed is 10.1 million, and then yung specific borrowing natin ay 2 million, so what is applicable to general borrowings is only 8,100,000. So yung 8,100,000 na yan yung gagamitin natin pag-compute, no, sa applicable na borrowing cost, which is capitalizable. So this is how we determine our capitalizable borrowing cost. So the specific borrowing cost, again, is 15% times 2 million. So that's 300,000. For the general borrowing, as what I have mentioned earlier, so yung ating 12%, i-multiply lang natin, no, to the amount na we have determined as applicable, no, from the general borrowings. Again, ang ibig sabihin lang nito, class, na based sa ating na-compute na average expenditures, and then dineduct ating specific borrowing. So ito yung amount na ito ang most probably galing sa general borrowing. So that's why yan lang yung amount na yan ang kukumputan natin ng borrowing cost, or we termed it as capitalizable na borrowing cost. So that's a total of 972,000. So all in all, ang ating capitalizable borrowing cost, no, from specific and general borrowings ay 1,272,000. So the next is, if you'll be asked na magkano na ang cost ng building as of January 31, 2020. Kasi, diba, ito na yung final, no? Ito yung construction na talaga, or I mean, complete na yung building. So, how much is the cost of the building? So if you're going to look at it, the total expenditures in 2020 is 10,600,000. So, saan galing yan? Di ba dito? You have a total of 9.6 na as of December 31, 2019. I-add natin nung July 1 na expenditure. So, you'll have 10,600,000. Tapos, yung na-compute natin na capitalizable borrowing cost, which is 1,272,000. So, the total cost of the building ay as of December 31, 2020 ay 11,872,000. So, again, that's how you do it, no? Kapag more than 1 year ang ating construction period. Now, what if the construction period is more than 1 year but less than 2 years? So, example dun sa ating illustration kanina, di ba dun, na-complete ang building as of December 31, 2020. So, what if daw, no? Let us assume that the same data nung kanina na illustration, except that the building was completed on August 31, 2020. So earlier date na kompleto. So more than 1 year but less than 2 years siya. So most probably that is only 1 year and um 8 months, no, if I'm not mistaken. 8 months yung August 31, 2020. So the capitalizable cost for 2019 would still be the same. Tama ba? Kasi the same computations lang yun kasi good for 1 year talaga siya. The amount of the capitalizable borrowing cost is 600,000. Okay? Now, however, for the capitalizable borrowing cost for 2020, it would be different, no? So magkaiba na. Saan ba nagkakatalo, no? Saan ba nagkaka-difference, nagkaka-differ? So magdi-differ ang pag-compute or ang capitalizable borrowing cost for 2020 because of the fact that the building was completed in less than a year. So kung kanina doon sa ating computation ng capitalizable borrowing cost ay full year ang ating denominator. So this time kasi until 8 months lang. So it will have impact in the determination of your average carrying amount. So like for example here, no? For 2020, ito yung ating magiging computations ng average carrying amount. So again, for a start, you'll have January 1. Ito galing sa 2019 na information, no? Or na balanse nung ending last year, so magiging beginning this year. So 9.6 million. So that includes expenditures plus the capitalizable borrowing cost of 600,000. So dito, 'di ba, ang gagamitin natin ay 8 months ang denominator. Again, that is representing January 1 until August 31, which is only good for 8 months. So for July 1, so ang pag-count natin is July, then August. Kasi August 31 naman ito. So you'll have lang 2 months over 8 months. So this is your average carrying amount. No? Mas maliit. So 9,850,000. So pagkatapos niyan, so determine ulit natin no, magkano ba of the total expenditures, magkano ba ang applicable to general borrowings. So if the total average carrying amount of your asset is 9,850,000, so i-deduct natin yung specific na sa borrowing na 2 million. So what is applicable to general borrowings is only 7,850,000. So from then, we can compute now our capitalizable borrowing cost. So for the specific borrowing, so you have only 200,000 as compared to 300,000 kanina. So saan ba nagka-differ? No? Saan ba ang difference? So ang difference ay nandito no sa iyong um, sa iyong time period. So since 8 months lang naman, no, until 8 months lang no, nakumpleto na yung construction. So hanggang August 31 lang yung capitalizable na borrowing cost natin. So that's why you have here this computation, 15% times 2 million times 8 over 12. So you have na lang 200,000. Again, the capitalization of borrowing cost will end, no, or will stop kapag nakumpleto na yung assets. So in this case, nakumpleto siya August 31. So dyan na lang, hanggang dyan na lang yung capitalizable natin na borrowing cost. And then, for the general borrowings, so as mentioned kanina, di ba, what was applicable is only 7,850,000. So that amount will be multiplied by the percentage, no, the interest rate applicable for the general borrowings, which is 12%. And the same thing lang, no? We just have to multiply it by 8 over 12. Kasi nga, good for 8 months na lang, no? Until na nakompleto ang ating qualifying asset, which in this case, a building. So, total capitalizable borrowing cost is only 828,000. So, kung tatanungin tayo, magkano ba ang total cost of the building as of August 31, 2020? So, that will be total cost, total expenditures, which is 10,600,000. Again, that's 9.6 plus 1 million, so that's 10.6. And then, yung capitalizable borrowing cost as computed here is 828,000. So, a total of 11,428,000. So, again, mas maliit compared doon sa nakaabot talaga ng 2 years kasi nga, kinonsider lang natin, ang kinonsider lang natin is until doon sa time na nakompleto na ang building, no, or natapos na ang construction ng building. Okay? Sige. So, eto naman, what about this case? No? What if the specific borrowing for asset is used for general purpose? You know, supposedly, nag-borrow ka for the construction of a certain qualifying asset. Kaso lang, nagamit po siya for general purpose. So, ano bang ating take dito? No? Ano yung ating treatment kapag ganun? So, just take note that pag ganito yung borrowings, this borrowing shall be treated as general borrowing, no? In determining the capitalizable borrowing cost. So, in short, i-apply natin yung concepts, no, or yung mga theory about how to compute capitalizable cost under if the borrowing is considered a general borrowing. So therefore, no, the capitalizable borrowing cost is just equal to the average expenditures on the asset or yung average carry amount of the asset multiplied by the average interest rate or yung sinatawag natin na capitalization rate. So another concept here. So ito class importante, no? Kailan ba tayo magsa-start na mag-capitalize ng ating borrowing cost? No? When shall the capitalization of borrowing cost commenced? So sabi dito, no, per PAS 23, mag-start ka na pag-capitalize ng borrowing cost when these three conditions are present. So first, unang-una, of course, if the entity incurs already expenditures for the qualifying asset. So, nag-start ka na ng construction, for example, no? So, yun, no? Isang condition na yun na dapat na mag-signify na kailangan na nating mag-capitalize ng borrowing cost. Another is when the entity incurs borrowing cost. So, pero pag meron ka ng yun, isa, meron ka ng expenditure, no? Ito, nangutang ka na and you incurred actually, no, the borrowing cost na. So, nag-report ka na ng interest expense, no, or mga finance charges. And lastly, when the entity undertake activities that are necessary to prepare the asset for the intended use or sale. So, take note, class, no, na itong activities that are necessary to prepare, no, the asset for the intended use or sale, this encompass, no, more than physical construction of the asset. So in short, class, posible pala na kahit wala pang actual or physical construction of the asset, pwede pala na masasabi na natin na ang entity ay nag-undertake na ng activities that are necessary to prepare the asset for its intended use or sale. So bakit? No? Like, for example, hindi naman necessary talaga na nag-construct na or nagtatrabaho na, no, in constructing the asset. It is also possible na you are already working on the building permit, no? Kasi 'di ba necessary naman talaga 'yan para makapag-start ka ng construction. So that is already included. So just take note again that yung mga technical and administrative work prior to the commencement of the physical construction, so which includes the preparation of the plans, for example, no, yung paggawa ng plano, no, yung coordination nyo with the architect or the engineer, for example, no, obtaining the building permit, no? Kasi 'di ba that will be needed for you to be able to start your physical construction. Okay? So that's it, no? So yan, activities to prepare. So kahit walang physical construction but meron ka nang ginagawa, you can start already capitalizing your borrowing cost. Another point here, just take note, class, that mere holding assets for use or development without any associated development activity does not qualify for capitalization. Like for example, no, meron ka ng lupa and then you intend to put up building there. So if wala ka pang ginagawa, no, for in order to achieve or in order to accomplish that construction of the building, then take note, it will not qualify capitalization. Say for example, no, pumili ka ng lupa tapos meron kang utang, no? For example, in relation to that. So kapag wala ka pang ginagawa, kasi you are intending to, or your intention is to put up a building in that particular land. Tapos may utang ka na. So just take note kung wala pang activities, no, na ina-undertake ang entity para ma-achieve or makapag-construct ng building. So take note, hindi pa pwedeng mag-capitalize ng interest na mai-incur mo in relation to your loan. So yun, dapat klaro, no, na ang interest or ang borrowing cost will only be capitalizable when these three conditions are present. Okay? So, next, we have ito. So, tapos na tayo sa commencement. Kailan ka magsa-start na mag-capitalize? What about ito? Suspension. No? So, ano yung suspension? Parang momentarily, wag munang mag-capitalize. So, anong sabi sa standards? So, capitalization of borrowing cost shall be suspended during extended periods in which active development is interrupted. So, if there is, again, no, interruption of active development for an extended period, then the borrowing cost shall be suspended muna, or capitalization of the borrowing cost will be suspended muna. However, just take note that capitalization of borrowing costs is not normally suspended during a period when substantial technical and administrative work is being carried out. And then capitalization of borrowing costs is not also suspended when there is temporary delay, which is necessary part of the process of getting an asset ready for its intended use or sale. So, ang sinasabi lang dito, class, na ano yung interruption na kailangan or will trigger the suspension of the capitalization of borrowing cost. So, for example, no, meron kang hindi ka makapag-construct, hindi ka nakapagpatuloy na ng pag-construct ng building kasi wala ka ng perang pang-construct. So, tapos meron ka pang iniintay, no, na pera to capitalize or to finance your construction. Say, ganito, may utang ka na before, so yun ang start up mo sa pag-construct ng building. Tapos here comes a time na naubos na yung pera na inutang mo. Tapos wala ka ng budget, no, to continue the construction. So since, no, the active development is interrupted, so just take note that the borrowing cost that you'll be incurring in relation sa imo ang utang will not be capitalized yet. No? So, suspend muna natin yung ating pag-capitalize ng borrowing cost if there is interruption, which is not necessary naman. No? So, pag necessary siya, then there's no need to suspend the capitalization or the capitalization of borrowing cost. No? So, example niya dito, no, na kasi baka na-interrupt nga ang construction ng building, needed naman talaga sa process, no, na ang interruption na yun or ang temporary delay. So for example, no, hindi ka pwedeng tuloy-tuloy ng trabaho. Like for example, if you are already in the phase of the construction na no, parang magpapatuyo ka ng sementos, of course that is needed in the process. Hindi pwedeng hindi pwedeng mag-proceed sa next na work, no, or sa next part ng construction because you still have to ensure that ang semento na binuhos mo last time is already na siya, no, ready na for the next stage. So it will need some time. So that some time there, the temporary delay there will not make, no, or will not lead to the suspension of the borrowing, suspension of the capitalization of the borrowing cost, simply because that process is actually integral, no, or necessary in order na mapagpatuloy mo ang iyong pag-construct ng building. So, ang pinaka-point lang, class, is that if the suspension or if the delay, no, if the interruption of the active development is needed naman for the furtherance of the construction, or needed naman, no, para maging ready yung asset for its intended use, then there's no need to suspend the capitalization of your borrowing cost. So yung mangangailangan lang ng suspension is that if the interruption is for extended period, tapos hindi naman talaga siya necessary or hindi siya naman part doon sa construction. Okay, and then eto, kailan tayo magsa-stop na cessation of capitalization? Kailan ba mag-stop ang pag-capitalize ng borrowing cost? So sabi dito sa standard, the capitalization of borrowing cost shall cease to when substantially all of the activities necessary to prepare the qualifying asset for the intended use are complete. So the asset is normally ready for the intended use or sale when the physical construction of the asset is complete, even though routine administrative work might still continue. So yan, pag kompleto na ng asset, just like what we had kanina sa illustration, pag makomplete na yung asset, mag-stop na tayo ng pag-capitalize ng borrowing cost. So pag meron ka pang mga, of course, tuloy-tuloy pa man yung borrowing cost na ma-incur mo, so i-expense mo lang siya outright if complete na nga yung asset. So lastly, we have here disclosures related to borrowing costs. So what are the things that you need to disclose on the face or in the notes of financial statement? So first, the amount of borrowing cost capitalized during the period. So magkano yung amount of the borrowing cost capitalized, na dapat klaro yun na magkano yung amount na in-add up mo as part of the cost of your asset. And then the capitalization rate used to determine the amount of borrowing cost eligible for capitalization, especially for katong general borrowing, no? Magkano ang capitalization rate na iyong ginamit sa pag-compute ng capitalizable borrowing cost. Okay, so that's it. So I hope you're able to learn something from this video, class, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!